This is Peter Helland with Citizens for Community Media, and we've had some requests that David Wemhoff come back on, and of course he's always willing to come back on. And the scripture we're going to jump to here is because the last couple shows we did it on the Covington boys and challenging their response to jesting. There's a scripture here. I just happened to open the Bible up, and I hate to be a mystic, but Psalm 37:13 says, "The Lord shall laugh at him, for he seeth that his day is coming." It's saying that God does watch down, even on the great American experiment, which is what you just did your paper on here. The title of your paper is The State of the Union. And you go back to Thomas Paine, you go back to the founders, and you try to explain, where is this country coming from? And then you look at the Catholic factor. But I do want to start out with your opinion on what happened on the Covington boys. Now, my take was the black preachers were preaching, when they saw the boys come in, they were preaching to the Indians, and they saw the boys with the mega hats. And immediately the black preachers saw their opportunity and said, "You guys support a hypocritical nation. You put on your coins, in God we trust, and yet you pass pro-faggot laws," they said. And then they said, "Homosexuality is a sin." They were hitting the boys really hard, and it looks like the boys melted. They melted. They're human too. They're defending the sodomite position, it seems, and they start booing them, and then they moved into jesting. So for me, that was the key thing. That was the key thing. And why did these Catholic boys, why did they disagree with these preachers who said all kinds of wrong things? Why did they disagree with them on that one? When it's clear what they preached at that point, the preachers were right. They were wrong on a lot of things, but they were right on that one. But the boys were trained to disagree with that.
Well, the boys were from a well-to-do Catholic school, okay, and they were for the most part whites, and they were for the most part Catholic, as far as I know. Mm-hmm. So their response was the result of whatever their teachers taught them. And so their teachers are under the control, at least on paper, of the Catholic hierarchy, right? So that is where the state of the mind of the Catholic hierarchy is.
Right. So here's these boys, which I went to the march too, and their argument was, well, homosexuals are human too, but the abortionist is human too. And the M13 gang members are human too. So what's the point? I mean, so the culture does what with, really bad gang members or abortionists or sodomy people? I mean, everybody's equal to what degree? Because that seems to be your theme here, the American proposition. So where does the American proposition, which is the theme of your big book that you wrote, kind of, and on your website called American Proposition. And then I was looking at your website, looking at that again, and of course it was Henry Luce was referring back to the Gettysburg Address, that we're dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And Luce then says, yeah, we're an ideology. And in your paper, you said that America is the first time in history that a country is not based on an ethnicity or a religion. It's based on this ideology. And the question is, what is this ideology?
Well, it's a set of ideas that I've said on this program before, and we've talked about it, but it's always good to refresh people's memories. But it's a set of ideas by which society is organized. And these ideas say certain things. They hold certain things. And it's the civil society knows better than government. Government's a necessary evil. Everyone should have rights. That the government is there to protect those rights. We don't have a state-established religion. We have freedom of press. We have all these things that say, we can kind of all come together and govern ourselves and have a good society. Well, I think that what you're dealing with there is liberalism, with capital L. That's the basis of America. And what liberalism does is a pretty effective and efficient way to allow for the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of, for lack of a better term, the 1%. Okay, because the Constitution of the United States protects liberalism, and it's also built there on a certain political economy. And that political economy tells us what is important and what isn't, and how the system of laws and the economics are to be interrelated. And so this is what was created, during that 10, 12 years from 1776, until about 1787, 1788. So what you have in America, and what you've always had, is real power rests in the private interest. So that is really driven home with the First Amendment, which says that you don't have an established church, you don't have an established religion. What you've got is protected press, protected speech, protected from the government. Okay, but other private parties, like say YouTube, can pull your videos off, or they can censor your videos or do whatever they want. That's part of liberalism, because the powerful private interests determine what the mores of the day are. And the Catholic bishops have for a very long time given into these interests. And I think that it's best, I talk about it in my book when I talk about Archbishop and then Cardinal Spalding and Gibbons. And these guys were very much into defending the American system of social organization, because they hobnobbed with, the 1%. That's who they hung around with. And what you have to also understand is that by doing that, the Catholic bishops and the Catholic cardinals and the Catholic Church, the Catholic leadership, has allowed Catholics to move up and acquire wealth and acquire influence in society. Now, they're not going to be using that influence to bring Catholicism to bear on society, no. Because Catholicism, like any religion, is a check on people. And that is one thing the founders did not want in America, and that is one thing that everybody agrees to. Religion is not there to be a check, it's there to approve of what's going on or to support what's going on. A key part of my book that a lot of people miss is that the doctrinal warfare program was actually developed at the government level, it was actually implemented by wealthy Catholics. Dr. Edward Lilly was the guy who devised it. I mean, sure, you had Henry Luce, who was a Presbyterian, who had his own view, and he was in accordance with John Courtney Murray, who was a Catholic priest, who was also in accordance with him.
Can we look at the bigger picture? Because you do bring it up in your website there, that America, of course, the British call it the Presbyterian Revolt. Okay, so the Presbyterians and the Catholics, of course, were at odds, and the Freemasons, Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which is my grandfather's background, linked up very nicely with Presbyterianism. So they took over the country. Okay, and then Henry Luce was a Presbyterian. So you had two systems of how you organize society. They were already at odds, but both are kind of broke down. So the Presbyterian is kind of this broken down Presbyterian, maybe secularized.
Well, it's a club. Presbyterian, like the Catholic Church, it's a club. Okay, it's a club. It's one way to come into the American experiment. These are gateways into the American experiment, to be part of America. That's a club. If you were a Presbyterian 50, 60, 70 years ago, you had a chance to really advance in America. Not so much now. Catholics, they advance if they can affirmatively check Catholicism at the door. They can advance. Recently we had a situation where Justice Roberts, Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts, cast a deciding vote on the Louisiana abortion statute that restricted abortions, and he said, no, we're not going to review, that law. We're going to let a lower court holding stand, saying that it's illegal. So all the Catholics are shocked. Well, no, you don't bring Catholicism to the public sphere in America if you want to move up. It's that simple. And the bishops understand that, and the bishops take their orders from the wealthy people, the 1%.
Do you think, okay, you had, I think it was Cardinal Hughes way back, 1850?
1850, he said America needs to be converted.
Right. And that was, of course, the Catholic position. But they came against, Grant and those guys. I mean, they hated Catholics. I mean, they were. I mean, there was a movement to get rid of Catholics almost.
Well, they're afraid of Catholics because the Catholic doctrine has always been, hey, we're going to establish the confessional state, where the Catholic Church gets established and all the laws are compared to the Catholic religion. It's always been Catholic doctrine. Now, the leadership no longer believes in it, and we've talked about this. Pope Francis threw that away. He said, I don't believe in it anymore, back in May of 16. And so you have Catholics now really just kind of running around, dealing with one cause or another, and there's divided between themselves as they are within themselves.
But the strength behind that Catholic position is that, like with Jacques Bossuet, the famous French bishop, they defended the divine right of kings. In other words, they defended the idea that the king had a right to rule. So Catholics believed in hierarchy.
Well, be careful with divine right of kings. When you start talking about divine right of kings, you're talking about King James and about his view of that.
Well, let's just say a watered-down view.
But the Catholics have always said that the leaders get their authority from God.
Yes, and however you want to. I mean, an extreme case, we're taking that off. We're just talking the basic idea.
But you're also talking about government, okay? You're talking about the political system. And so recently we had the State of the Union address, and we didn't know whether President Trump was going to be able to give it in the House chamber or not. And so he finally ended up giving it. He gave some ground, some people say, on the border wall thing, but they're still talking about it as we're filming this. But he gives a State of the Union address. And I'm saying there is no union. It's divided, but it's strong as ever. There are a lot of divisions in America. But the power, you can even call it the beauty or the resiliency of America, is that it takes all these divisions and brings everyone together. So the way it does that is by saying, look, we've got all these foundational documents, we've got all these doctrines about America, but you know what? You can read into those things whatever you want, and they can be in conformance or approval by your religion or your ideology, whatever it is, and you can participate, still feel good about yourself, and try to make money or write the last great American novel or do whatever you want to do.
Don't you think that with Vatican II, the thing that, on a practical basis, the thing that really came out of Vatican II, for people that lived through it, was the phrase, follow your conscience. Isn't that similar?
That was a huge phrase. That's exactly right. A lot of people came to take that phrase, which meant basically if you just sincerely believe in something, you can go with it. At the same time, the church stopped enforcing its own rules and doctrine. It just let anybody do whatever they want. And you see that even to this day. You see that with a lot of people out there with their own little programs or their publication or whatever, and they're claiming the Catholic position and they're doing their Catholic thing, and nobody checks them. Nobody checks them. The priests, the bishops, they don't care. They let them do it. Because the priests and the bishops now are there to make sure there's a heterodoxy within the church, so that there's this total disorganization. Because there's this unfortunate saying that Pope John the 23rd said. He said, we're not going to use discipline. We're going to let the leaven of mercy come out, and that will decide what's true and what's false. And that's the American idea. If we all talk about it, the truth will come out. We'll just follow the truth, and that's just why the system, democracy, is so good, because we'll all get out there and have the truth, and we'll talk about it, and we'll come together. The reality is, in America, you're seeing divisions getting bigger and bigger. And America is under stress. And in my paper, I say, there are 5 weaknesses, if you will, in America, against which are existential threats to liberalism.
In other words, liberalism is aware of 5 areas where it can be weakened or taken out.
I think at least 5, right.
Okay.
And one is always, the perpetual area is always military defeat. If you get militarily defeated, in a big way, that tends to cause societies to collapse. It's the same with every society. Okay, but there are other areas that are very unique to liberalism. Liberalism's always been afraid of religious societies. That is, societies that are based on a religious code. I mean, pick your code: Catholicism, some form of Protestantism, Judaism, Islam, whatever you want. Just pick one. But they're afraid of the society that's based on religion. Liberalism is also based on the ethnic society, the idea of an ethnic group, that's running it, that runs a society, that bases its policies, that bases its laws on people, because people, their existence, their continued existence, their prosperity is what is primary. So liberalism is afraid of those two things in a very big way. Liberalism has also got a very real concern about people just losing belief in it. They fall into their factions, and it tears the thing apart. And that's why you have this political system that's supposed to take all these factions and kind of keep them in the big group, keep everybody under the tent. If the system of democracy will work, you just got to vote. You got to vote your conscience, you got to do the right thing, and it's just going to work. And you can hear that in the interviews these days. You've got the congressman saying, we got to bring back democracy. I quote one of the congressmen: we got to bring back democracy and emphasize the importance of democracy in our daily life and making things happen. But you really have some very stark differences and worldviews in this society, and they're becoming more and more stark, becoming more and more different. And people are seeing that; they're understanding that.
You said it a couple times in here that liberalism. You basically say that it's a lie. There's a lie behind this. How would you define this lie? That liberalism is simply something that's not true.
Well, I think what I'm saying is people are starting to believe that there is a lie at the basis of this society, that it's not based on anything other than somebody's ideology, and that you have some really different worldviews that simply can't be reconciled, that somebody has to make the public policy, and it's going to infringe on those worldviews.
Wasn't the battle between the Civil War? Wouldn't you say the South had a radically different worldview than the North?
Oh, sure they did. They had a very radically different view.
Is there some connection with what's still going on today?
Well, this is the issue of factions. Okay, this is what the founders saw. They saw you would have factions in a society like this, but you could take these factions and they would check each one, was the thinking. They could check everybody else. And then you could take these factions and bring them into the democratic process, and everything would be fine. Everybody could elect somebody here, somebody there. But what happens is, as we saw with the Civil War, you had two big factions, and they were simply irreconcilable. And somebody said, this is not reconcilable. We are going to secede and form our own society. Now, the issue of secession was very much a live legal issue in 1860. It was by no means foreclosed at all by any of the founders, by any of the laws or any of the cases. That was something that was very logically thought of as inherent in the right of being part of this union. You could walk away from it at the time. And in fact, the law today is still, yes, you can dissolve the union if it's done peacefully, if there's a peaceful effort to do it. So that is still there. Now, you have various decisions that say it's an indissoluble union, but you got other cases that say, no, it's actually dissoluble. But there is another factor which kind of plays into the factions, which poses what I call the fifth threat to liberalism, and that is economic differences, wide economic differences. And that is part of the whole idea of having factions. You have the haves, you have the have-nots.
Okay, how about, we're at Notre Dame. Notre Dame is, when I went, it was $4,000 a year, the whole package, 1970. Now it's $70,000.
Yeah.
But if you get into Harvard, you're all of a sudden at a certain class.
Oh,
okay?
yeah, you're set for life.
So these universities, it's not just strictly money, because if you could say you went to Harvard, money's up ahead.
It takes money to get in those schools.
But they might get grants.
Right, but when you get in those schools, you can enter into a certain class if you're smart. Okay, so what liberalism allows, it allows a lot of social mobility, but not for everybody. There's just going to be a small number that are going to be able to take advantage of that social mobility. But it's that promise that appeals to a lot of people. Plus, there's a lot of creativity in liberalism. I mean, if the media is in the private hands, you've got the creative people, you got the culture, that's in private hands too. So if you're strong enough and smart enough, you can start your own company or your own nonprofit, and you can go out there and preach your gospel and do well and be somebody and feed your own appetites and desires. It's an ingenious system, how it pulls people in. But the reality is that you're having wealth concentrate more and more in the 1%.
And then you said in here that, and that we were texting, and I brought it up with you on a text there, but right here, these same leaders should also know that they are standing against. Now we're talking about leaders in the religious and ethnic background. These same leaders should also know that they are standing against a strong and entrenched dynamic in liberal societies. That is the dynamic of social Darwinism, set forth originally by Herbert Spencer in the 1800s.
Right.
So, of course, social Darwinism is one thing, evolution is another, but there is an overlap there.
There is an overlap, you bet. And Herbert Spencer said, the people who are smart and who can adjust, they're going to move up. They're going to do well.
And see, the reason, the biggest frustration I had with the Catholic Church at Notre Dame was the onslaught, the massive amount of just pure evolution that was being taught, and still being taught, and especially since Vatican II. And see, to my mind, that in itself puts you on a path of a worldview at odds with orthodoxy.
Well, yeah, it does. It helps you to take a look at the world, it prepares you to look at the world in terms of, there are going to be winners and losers. There's evolution. There are people who move up and there are people who aren't. And who do you want to be with? You don't want to be with the people who are losers. You want people who move up. So this is going to be the people, who are able to make money, who are able to be fast on their feet, had to learn some skill, create something, write something beautiful, whatever it is. It allows for a lot of creativity. And the problem is the society has got to keep growing in numbers, okay? That's the situation. And you don't have that growth. In America, you have things like contraception, which is part of liberalism, I get it, and also to abortion, which is also something which the system approves too, because it allows, once again, you to move up in this society, okay? If you have an abortion, if you use contraception, you're a burden with kids. What it does, though, is it reduces population. As you population is power. As your population grows, you have more economic activity. You have a bigger pie. If your population is shrinking, then you don't have that.
But the Western cultures are all shrinking.
They're pretty much all shrinking. All they've got is immigration right now coming in. That's all they've got going for them to try to keep the numbers up. But the immigrants are definitely, if they're illegal, they're a sort of an underclass, the reality is, because they're illegal. So they're not really adding that much to the economic development, of the nation in a way, at least not in the first generation. They help a lot of businesses to save on overhead, sure. But then as far as being able to increase the population, no, they don't, because they become infused with liberal values themselves, and you'll see it. One generation later, 2 generations later, they go down from maybe having 6, 7, 8 kids to 2, 1, none. That's just the way it is.
Okay, what's the effect of liberalism, which emphasizes the individual? So whatever benefits you is what you're trained to go for, whereas the old way was whatever benefits the group. I mean, Kennedy's famous statement, I don't know what value it is, but, ask not what you can do for what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Right. But see, like you said, the word country was invented by America.
It was invented, I think, by Samuel Johnson. And he wrote it with his dictionary that was... he started that dictionary, the big one for the English language back in the 1755 was the first edition.
And he really hated the American experiment.
Yeah, he didn't like the American experiment, but his project, was taken over time, and so you had this development of the word country as opposed to nation, and so you've got the United States is a country. It's based on certain principles, and those principles form an ideology, and that's protected. It's basically the ideology of liberalism, and that's protected by the laws, and that does create a certain amount of well-being for people. And it does allow for an enormous amount of technological advance and creativity. Yes, it does. But I'm just saying that these are, what I am mentioning in the paper, and what I'm mentioning with you here, is that there are some cracks that are starting to show, and these cracks are noticeable. They were noticeable the night of February 5th when President Trump gave a State of the Union address. You had the women dressed in white. People stood up when he said certain things. They sat down when he said certain things. And you can see it in daily life. You can see this growing tension, quite frankly, between the races. You can see it. It's nothing you should turn away from. It's, I think, getting deeper. Where that goes, I don't know. But what is of interest is at Notre Dame, they had this guy from, this writer, and we just have a few minutes. This writer from the Wall Street Journal came and gave a talk, William Galston. What he said, that there's starting to become a geographic divide now in America. It's becoming more noticeable now. And that is a very serious issue, because that could lead to what a lot of people fear could be another civil war. Because once you have geography, and you got different ideas on different geography, oh boy, you might have a real problem.
You're talking about the election with people in the city voted for Hillary Clinton, and the people in the country voted, or people that were in the smaller cities voted for Trump. Is that what you're talking about, geography?
That's essentially it. But they have different worldviews too. The city dwellers have different worldviews from the people out in the country. But Galston writes for the Wall Street Journal, so that means the 1% has taken note of it. When he says that at Notre Dame, the 1% has taken note.
So the 1%, like you said, just to refresh, are worried about these 5 areas.
I think they've always been, yeah.
And you got ethnic concern, the ethnicities gaining strength, the religious denomination, or just the religious gaining strength.
Right.
Those are 2.
Or being independent. Now they don't have to worry about the Catholics being independent, because the Catholics leadership will always do what the wealthy people want done.
But like you wrote in here, unless they remove even the Pope, the bishops, and the cardinals.
They got to all go.
That's what you were saying.
I mean, if the Catholic Church wants to renew itself, everybody from bishop up through Pope, they've got to go. They've all got to go.
Because they're so infected with the liberal worldview.
They are infected with it. They're not gonna turn around.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty bold reform that's needed.
That is bold reform. But other things they should do with the Catholic Church is they should get the all the property that they have. If they want to reform the church, you got to take all that property away from them, put it in some kind of a blind trust. When the church is established in that society, then they can get it back. I think another thing is too, if the church is serious about doing reform, the priests, they need to do physical labor.
That's what, yeah, you wrote that. Maybe 5 or
5 to 6 hours
5 days,
a day.
8 hours a day, or something like that.
Physical labor, absolutely, because that toughens you up. You need to do it. So these are my ideas. I'm sure that we'll get some interesting comments on that.
Okay. Well, we're going to cut this show short, just a half an hour here, but there's a lot more that can be talked here. So hopefully you can come back on.
We'll talk about it.
Okay. So this is Peter Helland with David Wemhoff on Citizens for Community Media.